All right, we are all set, Senator French.
Good to go?
Yep.
Welcome and good morning. I'm Harold French, Senator from District 7. Today we'll be holding a meeting of the Senate Commerce Committee. Before I get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Commerce Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the general court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.newhampshire.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, we will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call and roll call vote only. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call of attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are, and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So let's get started. Senator Cavanaugh.
Getting pretty smooth at that. Kevin
Yeah,
Cavanaugh at my home in Manchester. I'm currently alone in the room, but my wife and son are in the house. Thank you.
Senator Gannon.
Senator Gannon in Sandown. My kids were back at school, but the wrestling team got exposed, so they may be walking through. They're Zooming from home. Otherwise, everything's great in Sandown, and I'm ready to go.
Nice. Senator Bradley. Senator Bradley? Mute.
Yep. Sorry about that. Good morning. I'm in Rockport at Karen's rental property, and I'm alone in the room right now.
And Senator Susie.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Donna Susie in Manchester at my home, and I'm alone.
And once again, I'm Senator French. I'm broadcasting live from my home in Canterbury, New Hampshire, and I'm alone in the house. So I think today we're going to have a short day. We've only got 50 speakers. We're going to start off with Senate Bill 138, and is Senator Sherman with us?
He is. Senator Sherman, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Barely, but yes,
Barely, or is it okay?
it's fine.
Okay.
We can hear.
Thank you, Senator French and Mr. Chair. I would like the Senate to make a recording of your introduction and your right to know script and use that for every committee hearing. It is just spectacular.
Listen, don't try to butter me up. I've already talked to you about this.
I'll use any means necessary. For the record, Tom Sherman, State Senator, District 24, 11 towns on the Seacoast, right next to my friend Bill Gannon in District 23. I am here today to formally introduce SB 138, and I'll give you a little background. There are others who are here to testify to give you a little more detail about why this is being brought forward. Just in terms of the issue of price gouging, we know that places like Florida have fairly robust protections. Imagine a hurricane's coming and everybody needs plywood, and somebody jacks up the price to an unreasonable amount. Florida does have the capacity to declare a market disruption for that specific product and say that's not allowed. You're allowed to profit. And I think all of us believe in profit, but you can't take advantage of people who are vulnerable. Nowhere has that confronted the state of New Hampshire more clearly than during COVID in our nursing homes. We know that the nursing homes have borne the brunt of COVID. The vast majority of deaths have been in nursing homes. The staff, the residents, the administrators, and the families have all suffered incredibly during this process. But imagine if you go to get a box of gloves to protect your 89-year-old resident, and a box of gloves that, as we discussed yesterday, Mr. Chair, might have been a couple of bucks or even $10 is now well over $100. And you'll hear these stories coming up. That is called profiteering or price gouging, and other states have protections. So I co-founded a group called the Senior Support Team last March in response to the onset of COVID. Many of us recognized, I was working with a group of MIT professors, I was their chief medical officer, and we recognized that across the country, the single most vulnerable sites were nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Along with Daniel Curtis, who's our executive director, we started the program. Our statewide coordinator is Judy Joy, who is both a nurse and a professor of nursing in New Hampshire. And within 2 weeks of concept, we were launching, and we've reached out to many facilities. And Daniel will be giving the testimony on this, but what we recognized was that the facilities with limited budgets, dependent on Medicaid reimbursement, were getting gouged during COVID. I reached out to the Attorney General and found that the only protection against this in the state of New Hampshire was actual federal protection. Attorney General McDonald was very supportive of the idea of giving the Department of Justice some clout and some teeth to make sure that while we all believe in profit, but that people would not be able to take advantage of our most vulnerable during a time of crisis and emergency. We looked at other states, Florida, Maine, Vermont, Wisconsin, other situations. What was the track record? And we found that Maine had a very well outlined statute on this. It required an invoking by the governor of a market disruption in a specific product. And in fact, during COVID, that actually took place. The governor did invoke that market disruption. And the good news is that with the bill, with the statute intact, according to the Attorney General's office in Maine, they have not needed to use it once. So the best bill in my book is a deterrent that doesn't invoke litigation or criminal prosecution. And so working with the Department of Justice, one of the Attorney General's people, Brandon Garrod, or Garrod, who is the Director of Consumer Protection in the Department of Justice, we brought the Maine statute as a template and adapted it for New Hampshire, and that is SB 138. There are those out there who say this is going to open the floodgates for litigation and suit against companies. That is just false. Number one, it hasn't happened anywhere else. Number two is there are several major speed bumps that need to be passed before anyone can actually use this statute. It is really reserved for the most egregious abuses of our most vulnerable. And so I talked to Mr. Garud about the concerns brought by lobbyists about civil action, and he said that the statute or the bill sits exactly where it should be in consumer protection, and that it would be a major hurdle to try to be using this for frivolous lawsuits, if not an impossible task. So I believe the protections are in place, the triggers are in place to make sure that this is not abused. And hopefully it would have the same track record that it has in Maine, which is one where it doesn't even need to be invoked because it serves as a strong deterrent to misbehavior on the part of vendors. With that, I will finish my testimony and be happy to take any questions. I would recommend, in terms of specific questions, I believe the Department of Justice will be testifying, as well as members of the senior support team, on our experience to date.
Thank you, Senator. I was curious, is there a high watermark or a number that proves that something has been increased in price, or is there a level at which this would kick in?
Yes. Well, it's not a fixed number because, of course, it's a formula. And this is what Maine has used effectively. And let me find it. It's on page, what is that, page 2? No, page 1, line 26 through 28, actually through the next page. It's the unconscionable price. So this is one that would exceed 15% more than the additional charge. So you would not be able to exceed a 15% markup after you take into account your overhead as a vendor. So the vendor themselves, they may be facing a significant markup from their wholesaler. The point here is that they don't have control over that, so they shouldn't be penalized for that markup. But the vendor themselves, once you take into account that wholesale markup, the vendor themselves would not be able to exceed a 15% markup above that, which, as you know, as very astute businessmen that you are, that is a significant upside, especially if it's net profit.
How about wages?
That's not covered in this. There are other things that we've seen that are not covered in this.
I thought services would come under wages.
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, great. Any questions by the committee members? Senator Gannon?
Thanks. Good morning, Senator Sherman. Thanks for taking my question. Just real quick, that 15%, so I either buy a mask or plywood, is it 15% more than what I paid or 15% more than what it's going to now cost me to buy the product in these hyperinflated situations?
That's a good question. In other words, if you have an inventory already, what can you, and I would have to defer to Department of Justice on that one.
So you understand my question. So if
I do, I completely get it. And
Great.
it's a great question. And, but if they can't provide the answer, I will get you the
Sure.
answer.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay. So this bill also has a non-germane amendment, which is being heard later. Unfortunately, the online sign-in form can't differentiate between the bill itself and the amendment. So if you'd like to speak on the underlying bill itself, please raise your hand in Zoom at this time, and we'll go through that list. The first hand I see is Brandon Garrett. Brandon, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Good morning, Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee. Thank you for hearing my testimony this morning. My name is Brandon Garrett. I am the Chief of the Consumer Protection and Antitrust Division at the New Hampshire Department of Justice. And I come here as the Attorney General's office. We try to remain neutral on policy. So I'm not speaking specifically in support or against. I'm here just to explain the Department of Justice's experience through the COVID pandemic and explain how this bill, I believe, would give New Hampshire consumers a substantial additional level of protection against price gouging in the event that we ever face another natural disaster, pandemic, or similar circumstance like we are continuing to go through with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to say that, what Senator Sherman said is correct, which is that New Hampshire is a state that currently does not have any specific protections against price gouging. And that, under most circumstances, the market should be able to dictate itself. People should be able to charge what people are willing to pay. And, in a fair market, that should all work itself out. As we quickly learned once COVID-19 hit. That is not the case when there is an abnormal market disruption for necessary products. And as the chief of the Consumer Protection Bureau, working through the pandemic and trying to address the people of New Hampshire's concerns during the pandemic, it became very quickly apparent that we were in the unfortunate position of receiving numerous calls and inquiries from members of the community, members of nursing homes, members of nonprofit organizations that were calling in and trying to report price gouging in prescription medication, price gouging in medical equipment, personal protective equipment, price gouging in masks, price gouging in hand sanitizer, and price gouging.
Two CVS's.
Somebody else. I can hear somebody else talking. Is anybody else hearing that?
Yeah, it's a little feedback.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't a question. But all of the products that became short and became in demand and became necessities, people couldn't get. And as a result, the limited availability was resulting in certain individuals attempting to exploit the situation and sell products for completely unconscionable and unreasonable prices. And I found myself in the unfortunate position of having to tell these callers, tell these consumers that New Hampshire does not specifically have price gouging protection. And as a result, there really wasn't a mechanism for the Attorney General's office to institute an investigation or to do anything about it. So there are many other states in the country that do have these levels of protection. As Senator Sherman said, I took some time when he was originally trying to come up with workable language for this bill. And I reached out to the Maine Department of Justice, spoke with their consumer protection chief. And as Senator Sherman said, this bill is modeled after that statute. And the consumer chief said that the best function of this bill in Maine has been simply having a deterrent effect on price gouging. She reported that there have been instances throughout the pandemic where there was reported price gouging, and that those instances were able to be promptly resolved with a phone call from the Attorney General's office that was able to point the individual to the statute that specifically made price gouging a crime during an abnormal market disruption. So I'm just going to quickly speak to, Senator Sherman talked about how there are very specific hurdles that have to be cleared in order for this to even come into effect. I think that's important to understand because this, unlike the majority of consumer protection statutes, is not something that is always in effect. It's something that needs several different elements in order to even be in play. And the first thing that has to occur is a natural disaster, whether it's man-made or whether it's natural, some sort of disaster that creates an abnormal market disruption. Without that sort of event, the statute is not even in play. Even then, once that abnormal market disruption exists, the product in question has to be what is deemed a necessity. And necessity in the statute is defined to include all the things you would expect it to include: food, medications, different items that are used for heat and electricity, but is also broad enough to include any other vital or necessary good. So you first need an abnormal market disruption. The item in question needs to be a necessity item as defined by statute. And even then, this statute does not kick in until the governor, in consultation with the Attorney General's office, declares that there is currently an abnormal market disruption for this necessary product. It's only once that declaration is made that profiteering in those necessities becomes a violation of New Hampshire's Consumer Protection Act, or would under the terms of this bill. And so the question of what amounts to an unconscionable price is the final hurdle here, and it's a very good question. It's not an easy calculus to make, and it's going to be different in every case. But I think that the language in this bill is broad enough so that it gives some guidance as to how to determine what looks like an unconscionable price, but is broad enough so that it isn't going to pigeonhole people into guaranteeing that it's a one-size-fit-all for every situation. And so what I mean by that is the way this bill begins the determination of figuring out whether a price is unconscionable is it takes the price that the vendor was charging immediately before the abnormal market disruption, and you add on to that the increased cost of providing that necessary product after the abnormal market disruption. So it takes into account that when the market, there's a shortage, it may be more expensive for vendors to provide a certain product. So you take those two numbers, you add them together, and if that number, when you compare it to the price that's being questioned, if the price that's being questioned exceeds 15% of the sum of the prior price and the increased cost of providing the product, it's what we call in legal terms a rebuttable presumption that the price is unconscionable. So even then, even if you're exceeding 15%, it's not guaranteed that it's unconscionable. It's a rebuttable presumption, which means that if the business has other good reason for charging the price that they're charging, they can rebut that presumption and present evidence for why they need to charge such a high rate at this time. And it creates wiggle room so that potentially, even if you are exceeding 15%, if there's other good cause shown, it may not be an unconscionable price. So I think that strikes the proper balance and gives the Department of Justice the tools that it would need to hopefully deter this type of conduct from ever being prosecuted simply by the existence of a statute like this. That's certainly the goal. We strongly believe that the market should set itself and should regulate itself based on supply and demand and based on what people are willing to pay. But I do think that based on what we have seen in COVID times, that when you have abnormal market disruptions, there is unfortunately a group of people that will take advantage of those that are in need of products that are not readily available. And our experience throughout this pandemic has been that unfortunately, New Hampshire is not currently in a position to protect the public against those types of actions. So that's all that I have to say on the matter. I would be more than happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you. You said you had calls during this pandemic, and you said you couldn't do anything about them. Could you elaborate?
Certainly. We received numerous calls throughout the process. Somebody's selling toilet paper at a price. This is back when, originally toilet paper was impossible to find. People were calling and saying, this grocery store, this hardware store, this gas station, they're charging this unreasonable rate for toilet paper. And so New Hampshire's Consumer Protection Act makes it unlawful to engage in unfair or deceptive acts or practices. It does not incorporate, whether a price that's too high would amount to an unfair or deceptive act or practice. So our jurisdiction, our ability as the Consumer Protection Act, as the Consumer Protection Bureau, rests within the confines of our jurisdiction as established under New Hampshire's Consumer Protection Act 358A. Currently, there are no protections in 358A that specifically make price gouging in any context, a violation of New Hampshire law. So as a law enforcement agency, unless somebody's violating a specific law, we really do not have the ability to do anything to deter or curb that type of conduct. What we were able to do in some circumstances was, I did my best to, on numerous occasions, call the business owner and try to get a sense of what was going on, and certainly try to, if there was price gouging going on, persuade them that maybe that wasn't the best thing for the public at large at this point. But on top of that, as a law enforcement agency, we can only enforce the laws that exist. And we found ourselves without any legal authority to try to prevent price gouging as it was being reported to us throughout the pandemic.
So if this bill had been in effect and some gas station was selling toilet paper for $1.50 a roll that they used to get $1 for, it would be exceeding the 15%. And is that something that you would have the right to take action on?
So there are several steps that would have to occur in order for us to be able to take action on. So my answer is potentially. If the governor had, before that point, declared that there was an abnormal market disruption for toilet paper specifically, and then the gas station was selling toilet paper at a price that was more than 15% the sum of their prior price and their increased cost of providing the toilet paper, that would have been a presumptively unconscionable price. And at that point, yes, if the gas station did not rebut the presumption, did not provide evidence as to other good cause as to why they are selling the toilet paper at that increased price, we would have the ability to file a civil enforcement action in Superior Court in order to obtain a court order to end the price gouging at that point.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for explaining it all to us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, the next hand is Daniel Mcguire. Daniel, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dan Mcguire. I'm a member of the board of Granite State Taxpayers, our state's oldest taxpayer organization, and we are opposed to this bill. I've been trying all morning to think of a way to sugarcoat what I'm about to say, and the best I can do is the very trite, well, this bill is undoubtedly well-intentioned. This bill is a disaster, and it would make any emergency situation where it was used worse than it would otherwise be. The price mechanism is extremely important. It has to function during shortages because it does two things. It reduces demand and it increases supply. So the choice facing us in these situations is it better to have some supply available at whatever price it is versus no supply available? Let's start with Senator Sherman's example of gloves during COVID. We got to a situation where there was all of a sudden a large demand for gloves. Those gloves physically simply did not exist in the quantities demanded. So the price has to rise to tell people who use gloves to use them, to reuse them, to use them less often, to substitute some other substitute if available, that sort of thing. The people who casually use gloves, maybe they use gloves for painting or something, well, or cleaning. Well, that's less of an important use than a medical use. And so therefore the price gets so high, they say, well, I'll just clean without the gloves, that sort of thing. Or similarly, the price tells suppliers that you better start putting in extra shifts, you better ship these by air, you better create more gloves as quickly as you can because the price is high and the profit is available. So the price mechanism is what creates supply and balances supply and demand. So in a case where the demand has just gone through the roof due to an emergency situation, we need the price mechanism to both moderate that demand and also to increase the supply. And I mean, that should be obvious, right? Wouldn't we rather have gloves available here in New Hampshire than being in Maine where there are no gloves due to this kind of a law? So I think maybe it's easier to see this if we talk about, suppose the same thing applied to wages. Suppose we had a snowstorm and there's a lot of power lines down, and we say, well, during an emergency, you're not allowed to charge overtime, right? Because overtime is more than 15% increase in wages. Well, what is that going to happen to the power line situation? If we can't pay linesmen overtime or double time or whatever they get when we're in an emergency, it's going to take forever to get power restored. And what we're trying to do during such an emergency is we need line workers from Quebec, from New York, from Ohio, et cetera, to jump in their trucks, drive here through horrible conditions and help us fix those power lines. Well, in order to get them to do that, their wages have to be higher than normal. They have to be higher than whatever they're going to get in their normal course of work. And so it's the high prices, in this case wages, that get them to do extraordinary things. And also it's those high prices that would direct them to the most important jobs and not the lesser jobs, right? I mean, they would stop, I don't know, installing light switches or something and work on restoring power. And so, and it's easy to see that, I think, in the case of wages, but the exact same thing applies for goods, because, for example, the trucks that the linesmen use, those trucks need fuel, they need gas, they need diesel. The chainsaws they use need fuel, etc. Well, fuel is a good, and if you're in a disruptive situation where you're out of power, the price of gas, the price of diesel, et cetera, is going to go up because the supplies can't get in very easily, right? And they can't be pumped as easily and whatever. So there's a supply disruption. So the price has to go up to tell ordinary users, moderate your demand, and tell suppliers, hey, we're in trouble here. Please, go to extraordinary efforts to bring in supply. So I've sent you a few articles that talk about this. This is not complicated economics, but this bill would make a bad situation worse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. So you brought up wages. I brought that up to the AG's office, Consumer Protection. He said he didn't think it covered that, but you apparently think this bill does affect that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. No, this bill does not cover wages directly, although obviously there are wages paid at vendors, right? So if a vendor can't charge what he wants, maybe it's hard for them to find workers to come in and hold the place open when, in bad conditions, right? There's that kind of thing. But no, the bill is not explicitly about wages. I just use that as an example because it seems to me it's maybe an easier example for people to understand, and it's just another price like everything else.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any questions from the committee members? No, you're off the hook. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Cameron?
The next hand is Daniel Curtis. Daniel, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Chairman French. Thank you, Cameron. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Since I have no feedback on my end, can everyone hear me all right?
Yep, just great.
Thank you guys very much. So I am Daniel Curtis. I'm the Executive Director of the Senior Support Team. I've been working with Senator Sherman for a year now, since last March. The mission of the Senior Support Team is to support assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities, and other senior residential facilities throughout New Hampshire by providing actionable information when they need it, like the waves of new guidance we've had roll out this year to fight COVID-19, monitor their status daily to avoid surprises, and advocate for any supplies or services they might need to make COVID-19 outbreaks in their facilities less likely. And we're very focused on that particular purpose, make COVID outbreaks less likely. We are an all-volunteer team that has operated 100% remotely since the beginning of all of this. Our volunteers have communicated daily with the leaders of 60 plus senior facilities all around the state since we began our daily operations last April 13th. Throughout this time, we've collected dozens of both prompted and sometimes entirely unprompted notes from our facilities about their experiences with price gouging in essential supplies, especially PPE. This was one of the top things we heard about from our facilities throughout last April and May. We began routinely and specifically asking about price gouging in early July. And our statewide volunteer coordinator, Judy Joy, has several additional statistics and notes she can share with you on that. We have notes on what happens when untested new vendors enter the market for medical supplies, cleaning supplies, and PPE. We know that several of our facilities sought out new vendors because traditional vendors had no supply available back during March, April, and May for basics like gloves, gowns, masks, the essentials of running a nursing home. Some of those facilities placed substantial orders with those new vendors last April and May at sometimes really exorbitant prices, hundreds of % higher than what they had been paying previously, up to 1,000% in at least one case we know about for some of those essential supplies. We've documented several cases where they paid up front, actually, in order to engage with a new vendor and secure supplies at that high markup. And then to add even further injury to the situation, in some cases received nothing at all after placing those overpriced orders. Now, of course, they have twice as much work and less time to do it because they still need their supplies. And now they have to figure out additionally if it's viable to take legal action on their own and get their money back. So having additional tools to discourage this type of bad behavior right from the beginning of an emergency would help keep buyers like long-term care facilities well away from any scenarios where this type of problem might affect the quality of care they can provide. Knowing that price gouging is off limits, having that deterrent effect established up front, as Brandon described, once we know that an emergency is happening, and knowing that price gouging will be followed up by the state, will help keep both new and established suppliers honest. And that's what we're really going for here. We want the market for medical supplies and PPE to work. We want supplies and PPE to get where they're needed as efficiently as possible to preserve the health and safety of all New Hampshire residents, including the vulnerable elder community in our senior care facilities. The team that worked on the concept for this bill sought out examples with fair provisions for suppliers. This is one of the things that drew us to look at the example of the Maine statute. And the bill we ended up with here includes a broad provision that allows suppliers of products under the Market Disruption Declaration to document their increased costs. I won't belabor that because Brandon explained that very well. So if you are a retailer, your wholesaler has increased costs, you can document that as a cause for increasing your own prices. And I fully expect, actually, that if that process of documenting the price increases in the supply chain was played out, that some of the price increases, perhaps many of the price increases we've observed that our facilities have experienced, could actually be justified under that provision. So certainly we would not find that every price increase for medical supplies was illegal if this bill were in place. For suppliers conducting business honestly, that can document those cost increases, it's my belief that nothing at all would change. And they would, in fact, be able to continue operating right through an emergency with the price signal working very much as the previous speaker described. But we know that the market for PPE and other essential supplies was, for many months, at least during last year when the pandemic started, unable to respond and unable to continue functioning well under the new circumstances of the COVID pandemic. And we know that bad actors were out there taking advantage of that. And we know that that made it even more difficult for some of our facilities on the front lines, caring for our most vulnerable seniors to get the supplies they needed. We don't want that to happen next time. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And so for this last pandemic, this was a worldwide event. Do you think if we didn't have, if we prohibited the increase at 15% for, say, surgical gloves, do you think maybe they all would have gone to Brazil, who would have paid 40%, or gone to Canada or anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, my understanding, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the question. My understanding of the way that has worked in other states that have similar price gouging statutes is that they do not actually see a sharp drop off in the supply that goes to their particular state. Certainly, they don't end up with zero gloves or any situation like that. I'm not aware of any state in the US where they had a sharp drop in supply like that relative to other states. So the supply still tends to be there. What a bill of this type tends to do in other states where it's in effect is that it discourages bad behavior. It discourages the extreme markups that come along when people are trying to take advantage of the situation, that it ends up not actually having a huge impact on the available supply.
So Maine has this law in place, you said?
Yeah, it's extremely similar. The statute in Maine was the template we started with when some of us got together with Senator Sherman.
Did they have any problems getting gloves, say?
I have heard no reports that they had any more difficulty physically acquiring gloves in Maine than we had here in New Hampshire.
And did they pay the same prices in New Hampshire?
So my understanding is that outside of the egregious particular cases where it's clear someone is taking advantage, there was not a large difference in prices.
Okay, great.
The places where we saw the difference was really egregious individual cases.
The small seller.
Right.
Who wouldn't be necessarily a supplier of a nursing home, maybe, or?
Not normally outside these emergency conditions. We know that our facilities were seeking out new suppliers, and that's one of the reasons this kind of thing came up.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Gannett?
Just a quick question. Thank you, Dan, for taking my question. 15%, you said you worked with Senator Sherman on making this number. How did you guys arrive at 15%? And my question, follow-up might be, what's the average nursing home making for profit margin?
I think so the second piece I think is easy to answer. I think the average nursing home is right around 0 on profit margin. Okay. I think they've got nearly no profit in the average nursing home. Some of them are really struggling and entered this pandemic with staffing shortages and basically no savings to use for emergency situations like this. On the first question, how did we come up with 15%? At least from my perspective, looking at this, I think the short answer is that that's what we saw in Maine. And when we reached out to them to learn about operational experience, we found that that had worked for them. There was a precedent for that. I think 15%, my understanding is that is a larger than the typical profit margin on a pretty wide range of bulk goods, everything from gasoline to electricity to masks. That 15% profit margin, a lot of the suppliers of those kinds of goods would be real excited, actually, if they could get that in normal conditions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Cameron?
Okay, the next hand I have is Judith Joy. Judith, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for setting the stage, Daniel. I am Dr. Judith Joy. I'm the volunteer statewide coordinator for the COVID Alliance, and I am also a nurse. And details, based on the conversations our liaisons had during 2020, we had 17 distinct facilities among our participants that in some way discussed PPE prices, expenses, or price gouging with our liaisons in 45 separate calls. That's about 31% of the facilities we serve, so a significant number. 12 distinct facilities indicated that they believe they were price gouged when purchasing PPE from private vendors. That's what we've been asking specifically about since the beginning of July, and that's about 22% of our facilities. We had at least 6 notes indicating that facility contacts asked for contact information to report price gouging. And so they were pretty motivated. We know that at least one facility among our members that went through the entire process of reporting price gouging to the federal district attorney, and that was back in late June. So we know there's significant hurdles there. Most of our notes on price gouging concern PPE and cleaning products. And of course, these things are essential in operating a facility that is dealing with a very virulent infection. One mentions contract agency nurses. We've received a couple of newer notes this year from about a sharp increase in the price of liability insurance for senior care facilities and the reductions in the range of coverage offered. So we have specific examples, and I think Daniel actually alluded to this, of up to 1,000% markup that is unconscionable for a senior care facility in the midst of a pandemic. We want you to make no mistake, senior care is a business that must sustain itself financially or cease to operate. If we fail to acknowledge the struggle of these essential services for seniors in our state, I shudder to think of the cost to the citizens of the state or our state itself, if many of them, or even some of them, elect to close. As a nurse, the worst possible scenario is they remain open and the services they provide fail to meet expectations. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I've heard twice about this 1,000% markup. Could you elaborate on that?
Certainly, we had one facility who was paying $10 a box for gloves, and I think I heard someone talk about gloves earlier. And gloves when you're painting your house are one thing. Gloves when you're taking care of someone with a very virulent infection is quite another. And so they were talking about, they reported having paid $10 a box for gloves prior to the onset of COVID, and over $100 a box for gloves during, they were charged that much.
Was that by a big distributor?
That was by a large distributor. I believe so, by their regular distributor.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, there are two more hands on the bill itself. The next one is Brian. Brian, if you could identify yourself for the record, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Great. My name is Brian Moran, and I'm Director of Government Affairs for the New England Convenience Store and Energy Marketers Association. And we represent convenience stores and gas retailers, independent transportation fuel distributors, and the businesses which supply them. In New Hampshire, there are almost 900 convenience stores, 655 are associated with selling motor fuels. Appreciate the opportunity. Good morning, Chairman French, Vice Chairman Gammon, and members of the committee. We are speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 138. We certainly understand the desire to want to address profiteering and some of the examples that we've seen. And, I think there's a mixed message here. Are we trying to create the statutory authority to be able to go after those who are profiteering, or are we trying to control prices? And I think, it should be limited to just being able to provide the legal opportunity to redress price gouging or those choosing to profiteer. We have significant issue with the 15% ceiling limit. I would note that in Connecticut and Massachusetts, they are also looking at bills similar to this, but they do not include any sort of price ceiling for products and services. We believe that retailers play a key role in terms of addressing supply and demand. I think one thing that's important to point out in this process about price gouging is, number one, During shortages, retailers can impose, quantity restrictions to help ease hoarding and minimize hoarding so that there's greater supply. Those are one of the reactions. And I think another key element is, given New Hampshire doesn't have direct experience following up with price gouging because it lacks the statutory authority, I think it would be important to look and hear at the testimony that I had heard in Connecticut, where they found that the majority of retailers were not gouging at all. They were responding to the wholesaler costs, the manufacturer costs, and even raw material cost issues as it came down. So with that, I would encourage the committee not to support this bill, particularly the 15% ceiling limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Gannon.
Thank you for taking my question. I, like you, have had a problem with the 15%. Certainly 1,000% is too much. 100% seems too much. Is there a better number you have in mind, and why?
Thank you for the question. Actually, my, if I had my druthers, I would have no ceiling placed, mainly because each retailer, retailer pricing is, appears to be straightforward, but it's fairly complex and highly variable based on the retailer and who their suppliers are and where they get it from, get their products and services from. And I would point to, the Connecticut and Massachusetts models where they don't include that, but they do it does provide the state the authority to go in and say, that really is egregious pricing that you're putting on the product. And I think that's what's needed here, is an ability to look at every business and what their supply chain is, and then make that determination, as opposed to, in essence, setting a price that may even catalyze more supply disruptions. Because if it costs you more than 15% to stay in business on that product and provide that product, you're not going to sell it, and you're exacerbating supply disruptions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Okay, the last hand I have raised to speak on the bill itself is only identified in the Zoom as Sarah. Sarah, if you could identify yourself, you should be able to unmute.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Beltate.
Good morning.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Good morning, Chair French, Vice Chair Gannon, and members of the Commerce Committee. My name is Sarah Beltate. I'm a fourth generation member of our family-owned and operated business, Beltates Incorporated. We are a retail hardware, lumber, and millwork supplier with 8 locations throughout New Hampshire. Beltates has been in business for 123 years, and I am grateful to be working for the company my great-grandfather started in 1898. I am the purchasing manager for building materials for all locations. I know firsthand what this pandemic has created in regards to product availability and procurement, let alone pricing. Currently, I'm the president of the New Hampshire Retail Lumber Association. I am speaking to you on behalf of not only my family business, but also on behalf of the NHRLA. The New Hampshire Retail Lumber Association represents 69 independent lumber and building material dealers, manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, and other associated businesses in the state of New Hampshire. I am grateful for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 138. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of us in ways we could not have imagined prior to March of 2020. We appreciate and understand the intent of this legislation as consumers continue to adapt to the financial hardships. Price gouging should be discouraged. However, we believe that not all categories will be abused during these market disruptions. Product categories should be identified as at risk, while others should be considered less likely. Lumber and building materials are not items that are stockpiled in large volumes to be distributed at an inflated price. These items are bought and sold on a weekly basis, with prices fluctuating as often and sometimes drastically. The lumber industry has seen an enormous increase in business during the pandemic. Citizens were told to stay home. Do-it-yourself projects and home improvements came to the forefront, and it has not slowed down. Unfortunately, this has brought another set of problems. Pricing has increased to historic highs in lumber. Procurement of materials is becoming more and more difficult. Some products are even on allocation. Even more products have a 6 to 8 week lead time. Even though pricing in the lumber industry is at historic highs, there is no price gouging. We have had customers come to our locations to ask for pricing on material because they believe their current provider is sticking it to them. I have told multiple potential customers that they should stay with their current provider as they've been loyal to them for all of these years. I'm telling them that my competitor is in the same situation we are in, and they are being treated well and fairly. The opportunity of price gouging is negated by the intense competitive nature of the independent lumber retail community, which does not include the big box stores. It would also be very difficult for a consumer to understand how our products are priced. There is no true medium for the average consumer to get this pricing. I could only imagine the amount of frivolous claims of price gouging consumers could come up with. Within the last year, lumber prices have astronomically increased with no true end in sight. Framing material for a house last year has over doubled this year. If a business were to make a decision to charge outrageously for material, it would be short-lived. Consumers would simply go down the road to another retail lumberyard and get what they need. However, this bill proposes to make perceived price gouging accusations susceptible to the private right of action. If this were to take place, businesses would have to spend precious resources defending themselves. In many cases, these retailers do not have the time, money, or means to be able to do this. It would become an extreme hardship on many of our businesses. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss our concerns with you regarding this legislation.
Thank you. Will you take your questions?
Absolutely.
Oh, I was just at the lumber yard. I bought some 2x4s at $7 a piece and plywood at $50. You see that going up or down in the near future?
Well, if I had a magic ball, I would not be in the position I'm in currently. However, unfortunately, there's nobody sees that this coming down anytime soon, and it's mostly because of demand.
Because of why?
Of demand. We're
okay.
Projects are still going on. People want to move out of the city up into New Hampshire, safe areas, and housing is going through the roof.
Great. It had nothing to do with this legislation. I was just looking to see if I should wait or buy more soon.
I wouldn't wait.
So any other questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Senator French, those are all of the hands that I have raised for the bill itself.
Great. Then let's take on the amendment. Anyone here to speak to the amendment? Senator Waters?
I think, Senator French, because it's a separate hearing, you have to close the hearing on the bill itself and then open the hearing.
I was just going to do that. So I'll close this hearing on Senate Bill 138. And let's open the hearing on amendment. Do you have that number?
0543S.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Waters is here. Senator Waters, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters from Dover here to introduce Amendment 0543S. I want to first thank the chairman for making it possible to bring this in, and of course, Senator Sherman, who was the prime sponsor of the underlying bill. It took quite some time with research and other issues to find a solution to this, and so that's why it's coming in at this time before you. And I've been sitting here, and I guess we are moving from toilet paper to precious metals. And what this does is it makes a change to the definition of investment metal contract that will enable New Hampshire folks to participate in these markets. Now, the trade in precious metals has some regulation on it to ensure that people make payment and then receive possession in one form or another of of the metals. And the difficulty that has arisen in New Hampshire is the way our current state statute reads, that the metals must be delivered to the person or to a depository within this state. And that made it, unlike folks who live in other states, rather difficult to trade in these metals. I will point you to the original statute, 421B 1-102, 32B, lowercase 3. And there is where it says that physical delivery of these metals must be made within 20 days to the person, or the person may designate a bank or licensed broker dealer within this state only, and not within any other state to accept physical delivery. So there's the problem. You'd have to pay for the cost to get it here. You'd have to have a relationship with the bank or depository, and it's effectively added a lot of expense to your being able to trade in precious metals. So if you turn to the amendment, it fixes that by adding a new paragraph after that definition that sets up the terms in which the physical delivery may be made to a place that is not limited to being in the state. So it would have to be financial institution, depository, storage facility, or depository designated by the department. And in any case, whichever way that the purchaser chooses to go with that, there is assurance in the consumer protection that these places are on the up and up. And so balancing consumer protection and the desire of New Hampshire residents to be able to fully participate in markets. This issue was brought to my attention by George Cotta, who's a constituent and member of a national organization. And I believe that he is available to testify as well, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great. Any questions from the committee members? Senator, you're clear to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Cameron?
Okay, anyone wanting to speak on the amendment, if you could raise your hand in the Zoom. Okay, first is Barry Glennon from the New Hampshire Bureau of Securities. Barry, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, very good. Is the committee able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Good morning, Senators. My name is Barry Glennon, and I'm the Director of the New Hampshire Bureau of Securities. We are the overseeing agency for the Securities Act, RSA 421B. There were a couple of items that I just wanted to make note. We do not oppose the legislation. However, we would like to point out just a couple things. We saw the proposed amendment on Friday. We weren't really involved with it. We weren't involved actually with the drafting of the amendment, but we did some quick research on this, and we do note that this language was derived from a model act dealing with precious metals and precious gems back in 1985. This was one of, I think, perhaps 14 provisions in this particular model rule. With that aside, I would just like to point out that there are about 15 states adopted this model language. New Hampshire did not. I can't speak. I've only been with the Bureau since 2001, so can't account for what occurred back in 1985 and 1986, but there were only 15 states. However, I do understand Senator Waters' interest here and his constituent in terms of being able to receive those precious metals or to have them in the hands of a custodian. Right now, as Senator Waters correctly pointed out, that right now the precious gem or precious metal or investment gems have to reside with a New Hampshire bank or a licensed New Hampshire broker-dealer. This would expand it to include financial institutions and other depositories that are recognized by the U.S. government. So I would just like to point out that in terms of consistency in language with the current statute, RSA 421B, we do refer to these particular commodities as investment metals and investment gems and not precious metals or precious gems. Just for drafting consistency, I might suggest to the committee you consider that to call them investment metals, investment gems. And then the second item really is the proposed amendment calls for financial institutions to be able to receive and hold custody for these metals and gems. Financial institution is not really defined in the New Hampshire Securities Act, just banks. So it's just something that you may want to consider. I don't know what implication it might have on the New Hampshire on the banking side, but just want to make note of that. Other than that, in terms of the period in which the metals must be delivered, our current statute is 20 days, I believe. This would be 7 days, would shorten the period. Probably not a bad idea, so that the seller has to provide them to the purchaser within a shorter period of time. That is essentially the only comments that I have relative to the bill, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the only other hand that I have raised on the amendment is George Cotta. George, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. My name is George Cota, by the way. Everybody gets that wrong. But as Senator Waters said, yeah, I am a constituent of his. I live in Somersworth, and I do some investing in precious metals. And I work with a precious metals dealer that maintains a continuous two-way market where you can sell to that, where you can buy from them, and you can also sell back to them when you want to liquidate your investment. And in order to receive the metals, they have to ship them to me. I have to pay postage and insurance. And when I want to sell, I can't just call them up and sell. I have to ask them to send me packaging and a label, and then receive that and then send it to them. And when they receive it, it gets sold at the price at that time, not at the time that I decided I wanted to sell it. So about a year ago, the person I was working with at this company said, we have a program where we can store the metals for you in a depository. It's very, very safe and guaranteed, and it's stored segregated as your own metals. And so when you want to buy, you just buy, and it can go into that depository. And when you want to sell, you can sell immediately, and you don't have the expense of shipping back and forth and the insurance. And I filled out the paperwork, and then he said, oh, we can't do it because New Hampshire is one of only 5 states in the country where it is not legal for us to store metals for you. And so I could be across the border in Maine or Massachusetts or Vermont or in almost any state around the country, and I could use this service that they have, but because I live in New Hampshire, I can't. And I'm thankful to Senator Waters for his work on this matter. And I am in favor of this amendment because it would enable me and anybody else in New Hampshire to deal with, to have metals stored in a depository, not have to deal with shipment, and get a lower commission also, by the way. And so I don't see a reason why I shouldn't be able to trade in these metals the way I see fit. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seems common sense. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Senator French, there are no hands remaining at this time.
Then I will close the hearing on Amendment 0543 S. And let's open the hearing on Senate Bill 67 at this time.
Okay, the prime sponsor is Senator Whitley, who is here. Senator Whitley, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Becky Whitley, and I'm honored to serve New Hampshire Senate District 15, which includes the communities of Concord, Pennacook, Henniker, Hopkinton, and Warner. Today, I'm honored to introduce SB 67, establishing a paid sick leave program for Granite State workers. When you are sick, you shouldn't be forced to go to work. It's bad for you, your coworkers, and your employer. So you may be surprised to know that 1 in 3 and perhaps higher private sector workers and 70% of our lowest wage workers do not have paid sick days to care for their own health or the health of their family. And those numbers are likely higher. For those workers, the decision to take time off from work to recover from an illness or to care for a sick child or family member is a choice between their health and their financial security. It's just not right. This basic support is especially important right now during a public health and economic crisis that has only heightened caregiving needs and financial insecurity among working families, and in particular among women. In the past year, New Hampshire women have lost more jobs than men, taken on even more caregiving responsibilities, and have served as the majority of essential workers on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. This bill is an important workforce initiative that will help us build a strong and future-focused economy in the Granite State. Paid sick leave can reduce employee turnover, increase productivity, build stronger relationships between employers and employees, and of course, reduce the spread of disease and sickness in the workplace and in the community. Ensuring working people have access to paid sick leave will help to protect the public's health by minimizing the spread of contagious illnesses in the workplace and ensuring working people and their families can address their own health and safety needs. It will also allow workers to seek early and routine medical care, which will diminish public and private health care costs in New Hampshire. Thank you so much for your time, and I will defer all technical questions to future presenters who will walk through the more policy-heavy aspects of the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. I'm taking over for a few minutes for Senator French and Senator Gannon. Question for you, just a quick question. So I or others who own small businesses, where's the money going to come from? Am I going to in turn say, geez, I only have X dollars. If I give you the paid leave, am I probably apt to say, geez, I can't give you as much vacation? If you're a younger worker, you're probably less apt to be sick. So are they going to, subsidize the older workers and family because they aren't as apt to be sick, between 20 and 40?
I think the point is that, do employers want sick employees to go to work? And I think the answer is no. It's not good for the employer, it's not good for the employee, and it's not good for the other employees. So it's a basic economic issue too, because, if a sick employee goes to work, they're going to get others sick.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. So do you not see that employers might then cut back on vacation? Or a lot of people are very good with their workers, like Senator Morse, and I see most employers as working hand in hand with their employees. And if you're out a lot for sick time, you probably wouldn't use the vacation time. Do you think we're sort of getting ourselves into an area that should be between the employer and the employee more?
Thanks for that question. I mean, the reality is, I think you're right that so many small businesses do the right thing and already provide paid sick leave, but the numbers are what they are. And we know that at least 1 in 3 private sector workers do not have access to paid sick leave. So they are left with a situation of having to go to work when they're sick or lose pay for the day.
Thank you, Senator. Does anyone else on the committee have any questions for Senator Whitley? Nope, seeing none. Thank you, Senator. Have a great day. Who is next, Cameron?
So the next person I have signed up is Senator Perkins Boca. However, I do not see her here. So the next person on the list is Representative Manny Espitia, who I also do not see here. So the next person after that is Representative Deborah Altschiller.
Okay.
Representative, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning, Representative. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for taking this testimony today. I want to thank you all for your time and service. I know how difficult this is to do remotely, but it's been such a blessing to be able to involve so many Granite Staters by doing it in this way. Paid sick days would protect the paychecks of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking when they need to take time off from their jobs to get medical care, support services, enact a safety plan to get away from their perpetrator, and if they choose, to go to court to seek justice. These are just as much safe days for survivors of violent crime. Paid sick and safe days would protect the paychecks of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking when they need to take time off from their jobs to get medical care, support services, and enact that safety plan. On page 3 of your bill, 275-I(3), part 1, parenthesis D. It is use of paid sick leave, and lines 23 through 31. I'd like to draw your attention to absence necessary due to domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking would be provided to seek medical attention for an employee or an employee's family member to recover from physical or psychological injury or disability caused by domestic or sexual violence, to obtain services from a victim services organization, to obtain psychological or other counseling, seek relocation due to domestic or sexual violence or stalking, and take legal action, including preparing for or participating in any civil or criminal legal proceeding related to or resulting from domestic or sexual violence. In my work for the last 9 years as a volunteer advocate for one of New Hampshire's crisis response centers, I have been to the hospital emergency departments on the Seacoast dozens of times to support survivors of sexual assault. The first time a survivor who had been administered a powerful cocktail of prophylactic drugs to address possible exposures to sexually transmitted infections from a perpetrator, that survivor told me they had to go to work right after this forensic medical exam was complete. And I was absolutely crushed for them. They could not afford to take any time off, and paid sick time was not allowed, not offered, not even a discussion. Many of my fellow advocates have accompanied survivors to court where they're applying for restraining orders against their abusers, and advocates are frustrated for their clients, seeing them check their watches, knowing they can't afford to miss a work shift, no matter how far behind the courts are running. Data from the National Violence Against Women Survey, published by the Centers for Disease Control, estimate that women in the United States lose almost 8 million days of paid work each year because of intimate partner violence. Survivors in New Hampshire who are employed in jobs with no benefits and unforgiving leave policies feel the tide pulling them under as they struggle to cope with an abusive household. Maintaining employment is often the linchpin in attaining financial stability to keep a family in crisis steady and self-sufficient while recovering from abuse. No victim in New Hampshire should have to choose between losing a paycheck or going to the hospital for a sexual assault examination and forensic medical evidence collection. No victim in New Hampshire should have to choose between losing a paycheck or a court date to get a restraining order against their abuser. No victim in New Hampshire should have to choose between losing a paycheck and meeting with a family violence prevention specialist from a crisis center who is helping them build a safety plan and access to life-saving support services. I urge you to keep the thousands of survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking in mind as you weigh the benefits of a paid sick time for the hardworking citizens of New Hampshire. And I also would like to just point out that this particular bill is written so that people might take a portion of a day, a couple of hours in the morning or a couple of hours in the afternoon to meet these obligations, tend to themselves, and be able to come out of crisis. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person I have is Representative Maria Perez. Representative, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the RAL committee, for taking my testimony. My name is Maria Perez. I'm a state representative from District 23 in Milford. I'm testifying because I'm not just a survivor of domestic violence, but I'm a survivor of Lyme disease. I have a chronic Lyme disease, and to be honest, being a survivor of domestic violence back in the days when I needed time off to taking care of my legal situation with my ex-husband, I didn't have the time. I couldn't afford it to take time off. It was either me taking time off to take care of my legal issues in my abuser, or put food on the table for my kids. It was difficult, not only because I didn't know exactly my rights at that time, and then at that point the abuser take advantage of me not knowing my legal rights. To be honest, I wish we had this kind of paid leave when I was going through that tough situation, because not just taking the abuse, but not knowing exactly what your rights are. It was so difficult. It was devastating for me, not having the time to have emotional, mental, and physical help that I needed at that point. And then someone taking advantage of that and take away your kids because you don't know your rights, because you don't have the time. You can't afford the time to take the time off to fight in the court, the custody of your kids, and then your kids been taken away from you because the person who's not just doing a domestic abuse on you, knowing that you need to work. You can't take time off because you need to pay your bills. I believe that this bill will help victims like me to take the time and then seek for the help they need. And then the other thing is, when I was going through Lyme disease, I didn't have time off from work. I have times and days that I couldn't even get up from bed because I have chronic Lyme disease. My husband has to take time off from work without getting paid just to help me to get up in my bed when I was going through my Lyme disease treatment. I believe families, they should be able to take time off with pay when situations like this happen. So I would encourage every one of you to support this bill, because people, not just me, but people in our communities, they're going through the same thing that I went through. And I believe that they need the help right now, especially with all the COVID and everything going on. I think a lot of families, they're going through a tough time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you for taking the time today.
Okay, the next person on my list is Jonathan Weinberg. Jonathan, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Weinberg. I'm 21 years old and I'm a recently elected member of the Concord School Board. However, I'm here in my capacity as an individual and not speaking on behalf of the board. We all know New Hampshire has to do everything possible to attract and retain young working families. We have a rapidly aging population, so much so that we have a statewide committee dedicated to addressing the startling revelation called the New Hampshire State Plan on Aging. Research by the state-sponsored committee states that by 2030, approximately 1/3 of New Hampshire's population will be over 65. These two issues combined illustrate that we have to do something much greater to attract people, especially younger individuals and families, to the Granite State. When young families look at opportunities and compare these opportunities between a state that stands to support its workers and one that delegates paid sick time to an employer's discretion, it is obvious which option produces a more secure working environment and overall environment to raise a family. Voting yea on Senate Bill 67 will not only greatly benefit the over 66% of Granite Staters who do not have access to paid leave, but will also help elevate New Hampshire's status as an ideal employment destination and help attract younger workers to our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, the next person on my list is Dave Juve. Dave, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Chairman French. For the record, my name is Dave Juve. I'm a Senior Vice President with the Business and Industry Association. Our office is on Main Street here in Concord. I'm here this morning testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 67. Employers understand the importance of a paid sick time benefit. In fact, most employers are moving away from using the phrase sick time and instead calling it personal time, because they recognize there are all sorts of reasons, some of which have been articulated by previous testifiers, that people need to be away from work. We're opposing this legislation because we don't think the state is in a position of, should be in a position of deciding what benefits employers offer. Employers that have the financial ability to offer paid sick time will offer paid sick time or paid personal time. The legislation like this tends to treat all employees as being equally financially solvent, equally available to offer a benefit like this, and that's just not the case. We encourage the committee to resist the temptation to try and tell private sector employers what benefits they should and should not be providing to their employees. It's a very tight labor market right now, which I know you're all aware of. Employers are really in the best position to develop a benefits package that they need both to attract employees and retain those employees. So I would urge that you find Senate Bill 67 inexpedient. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dave, I've got a question. So there are some companies that have up to 5-6 weeks a year for personal time. Would this be in addition to that?
Chairman French, I actually am unsure. I am thinking if a company can demonstrate that their benefit is richer, if you'll pardon the term, than what the legislation would provide, that should be sufficient, but I don't know that for sure. I guess I would ask the bill, if you could check with the bill sponsor on that.
I will, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Okay, the next person on my list is Lydia Yen. I don't believe I see Lydia here. I do not. Okay, we just had a hand go up. Let's see if this is Lydia. You're identified on the screen as NH Peace Action.
Oh yeah, that's my work account. Yes, this is Lydia. I am a working citizen.
Could you state your whole name and who you represent, please? Thank you.
My name is Lydia Yen, and I am a working citizen. I am testifying today on behalf of myself and my mom, as well as part-time workers. At the beginning of the year, my family contracted COVID, and we were quarantined for almost a month. During that time, one of my employers provided paid sick leave, and the other one obviously did not. No one else in my family was as fortunate. Paid sick leave allowed me to continue to pay some of my family's bills while I recovered at home. I can't imagine where my family would be if I did not receive that, because we were financially struggling. A little over a year ago, my mom was physically capable of working. Now she's kind of disabled. The work she did was exhausting, and she couldn't take a break to heal without suffering financial losses as a result, which ended up happening eventually. If she had received paid sick leave, she may not be incapacitated now. People should not have to choose between losing money or injuring themselves further to provide food for the family. So please put yourself in other people's shoes if you have not experienced these hardships. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Deborah Nelson. Deborah, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Deborah Nelson, and I am retired, and I live in Hanover, New Hampshire. And thank you, Chairman French and other senators, for giving me time this morning to speak with you about what I think is critical importance of providing sick leave to all employees in our state. And I want to hope that you will work with businesses like the gentleman who just spoke to help them see the benefits of this legislation. I'd like to share with you my own experience of having to use sick time when I herniated a disc in my back. And as I'm sure you all realize, that's not something you can plan for, nor is cancer, nor is a car accident, nor is a pandemic. As I'm sure you all realize, it happened suddenly. I was immediately in such excruciating pain that I was sick to my stomach. I was at a restaurant having dinner with friends, and I had to leave immediately, although I was honestly not sure if I would be able to drive the short distance to my house. I couldn't sit or stand comfortably, and the pain was so intense, I couldn't think of anything else but the pain. Fortunately, as a public school teacher, I had sick time negotiated in my contract, and I needed it. I needed it both for the couple of days until the intensity of the pain subsided, and I needed it for my recovery after surgery. I was always profoundly aware of my privilege in being able to take time off. I speak to you this morning as a woman about all those, so many of whom, as you've heard, are other women who do not have sick time, who cannot be at home with an ill child or care for an ill parent, or recover from surgery or illness without pay, or without losing pay. I apologize. I know every single one of us has had the experience of sudden illness that prompts us to spend time on the floor of a bathroom. And I want you to consider those individuals who still must somehow show up for their work. And I know I'm not alone in finding it horrifying to consider that someone with the flu might be preparing or serving a meal I plan to eat. And that's the reality right now. You've heard the numbers. I know I'm not alone in wanting the people who work in retail or at the grocery store or in restaurants or in any number of small businesses to know that they should and can stay home when they are contagious. I think also of those caring for a child or spouse or parents who have been hospitalized, who are dying, who are in need of care. And the struggle of these individuals has been made profoundly clear during the pandemic we are still experiencing. Senators, those of us with good benefits, those of us with negotiated contracts, those of us who are privileged when it comes to being ill, or to dealing with what life throws at us. We are not the ones that you, I hope, will think about today. Your job is to govern for the benefit of the many, not for the few. and not for the privileged. And so I ask you, senators, to consider the greater good as you prepare to vote on this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Cameron, could you bring Senator Whitley back in?
Sure. Senator Whitley, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly address your question. It's a good one. I just wanted to direct you to page 6, line 21. So your question was about whether this creates, if a business already has a paid sick leave program, whether this creates additional requirements, and it does not. So it's very clear in the bill, starting on line 21, that this bill just creates a statutory minimum. And it explicitly says that nothing in the bill would prohibit or discourage an employer for exceeding the requirement, but also nothing is a mandatory, makes it mandatory to exceed that requirement. So I just wanted to point that out that section, and I think it answers your question.
Senator, I don't see any hours on that. How many hours a year is that minimum?
So if you go to page 2,
Okay,
starting on line 14,
got it.
it discusses how paid sick leave is accrued.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Sadius Jankowski, who I presume is in the Zoom as Ted Jankowski. You should be able to unmute yourself. Mr. Jankowski, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Click on the unmute button. Okay, we'll come back to him.
Okay. The next person on my list is Aubry Friedman. Let me find her here. Aubry, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Aubry Friedman. Just speaking for myself, I live in Bridgewater. I speak in opposition to this bill. I mean, nobody's going to really argue against sick leave. The thing is, this is a very anti-small business bill. You realize, about 80% of the larger companies already offer it. So this would be mandating the smaller companies to have this benefit, which of course they would want anyway. Why wouldn't they already offer it? It's because they can't afford it. And so small businesses are different than larger businesses, have more employees. Somebody can cover for somebody else when somebody calls in sick. They can kind of handle it, but the smaller companies, they have less to work with. So we should think about them, because we have a lot of small companies, and especially I have to say at this time, after a whole year of the struggles of small businesses that are still around, they're just starting to come back, if they're hanging on. And so this is another cost that they would want to offer, they can't afford it. So we'll only force them to either reduce their hours of operation, which hurts their revenue, or cut employees' hours, or lay off employees, or worse, just go out of business. So I don't see how that will be helping anybody, not the public and not the employees. So another problem I have with this bill is it covers all employees in the state. Now, okay, from the public health viewpoint, it makes sense. You don't want sick people coming to work and spreading germs and all that stuff. Okay, that's fine. But you have actually minors that they don't, they're not the breadwinner of the household. So if they're sick, they can just stay home. So they're not forced with that choice of either working or not be able to provide for their family. So I don't buy the public health argument for them. And then we also have employees who work remotely. And so if they're sick, they just could sit there at their computer and they're not spreading germs in the workplace. So I think in throwing everybody into this pot is, from a public viewpoint, a health viewpoint, I don't think makes sense, to be honest. I do understand it for other people, but certainly applying to everybody. And actually a lot of young people are living at home a lot longer. So, for them, they just take a day off work and that's that. It isn't the end of the world and they're not the breadwinner. And so lastly, I just would like to say, though it's not ideal, having a job without sick leave is better than no job at all. And so if smaller companies go out of business, that increases unemployment. And that's not good for the public and it's not good for the employees either. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, the next person I have is Leah Cohen. Leah, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Good morning, honorable members of the Commerce Committee. My name is Leah Cohen, and I am a resident of Moulton Borough, and I organize with Granite State Progress. However, I come to speak to you today representing only myself and not my employer. I have been working full-time since I was 15 in a variety of industries: the arts, nonprofits, politics and community organizing, and most frequently, food service, as many young people do. I've come to work sick. I've worked through cold and flu-like symptoms because the risk, especially when you work in food services, is that you forfeit more shifts or even your job as a whole if you take too much time off. And also you don't get paid for that time, obviously. And if you have bills to pay, that can be really taxing. Looking back, I'm realizing we've been playing fast and loose with public health in the workplace. Knowing what we know now amidst the coronavirus pandemic about community spread, infection incidents, virality, cleanliness, I cannot even imagine a world anymore in which we just accept the spread of disease as a part of life in this modern world that we have worked so hard to build. However, as we recover from this pandemic and Granite Staters return fully to work, this will remain the reality that workers in our state risk personal harm and harming their coworkers without the security and stability of paid family and medical leave. Not only that, but 100% of the total job loss in this pandemic has been female workers who are disproportionately low wage earners and are expected to take care of their families. Paid family leave is not a luxury at all. It's a necessity and it's tantamount to equity. Before I conclude this testimony, I just want to address a frequent critique of this bill that I've been hearing this morning, listening to this hearing, that this would negatively affect small businesses. I've worked for a lot of small businesses. We've seen in California, New Jersey, plenty of states that paid sick leave actually helps small businesses because it creates more opportunity and it helps recruit and maintain a stronger workforce that is just more effective in the workplace. I'd be happy to send, I didn't submit written testimony, but I'd be happy to send some articles that really outline that in hard numbers, how paid family and medical leave is actually beneficial to small businesses and helps them thrive. Please vote this bill ought to pass for the good of Granite Staters. We need this investment in Granite State families, and it will pay dividends that will help our whole state thrive. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, I do see one. Senator Gannon.
Thanks, Leah, for taking my call. So as you said, you have, and I've seen evidence that paid family leave is beneficial to small businesses. Shouldn't that be their choice to make that, though? Shouldn't they be the ones to say if it profits them or not?
Sure, but I do think that we've seen, I would love to live in a world in which every employer chooses to treat their workers equitably, but we know that's not the case. That's why unions exist. So I do think that oftentimes the government has a responsibility to the people to step in and hold a standard for how employers should treat workers. Obviously, I understand that it's sort of the New Hampshire ethos to let people make their personal decisions. But I do think if the role of the government has any role in small business, it's to make sure that vulnerable people are protected from corruption. And we see that a lot. I have worked as a low-wage earner. I know that my employers were not treating me fairly, and I had no other option because I was a waitress, and waitresses tend to not have access to union protections because we're considered freelancers. So I know I was being mistreated by my employer, and I had no options. And I wish that as an 18-year-old supporting myself and working to earn money for my education, that I had had the protection of a government who had my interests at heart and would hold my employers to account.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Paula Garvey. Paula, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So my name is Paula Garvey. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear my testimony on Bill 67. As I said, my name is Paula Garvey. I live in Amherst, and I support this bill to ensure access to paid sick leave in New Hampshire. I wish to testify just to highlight the challenges that family experience when they have a child or a family member who have chronic health conditions, and how paid sick leave would help us. So my daughter Rosie has cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a chronic health condition that affects the lungs and other organs. It is a very complex health condition that requires a lot of care with frequent doctor's visits and hospitalizations. We're very fortunate here in New Hampshire to have an amazing CF Centre at Dartmouth Hitchcock who work with us so well. I did not work when Rosie was a child, as we do not have family support locally. We moved here when Rosie was a baby. But we were fortunate and privileged, I would say, that we could manage to live on one income, on my husband's income. However, I did need to go back to work when Rosie was in high school. And at age 15, she was also diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which has had a huge impact on her health and also has led to an increase in the need to be seen by her medical teams. Both conditions have led to multiple hospitalizations and surgeries, and we have had to juggle time and money and our priorities on many occasions. It has been very challenging as a carer to work and to care for a child with health conditions. Rosie is now 22 and is actually doing quite well, but I still feel the need to be available for her when she experiences health issues. Access to paid medical leave would lessen the pressure on families caring for loved ones who have chronic health conditions. So my own experience is in the past when Rosie was hospitalized, I was fortunate enough to have 4 days paid medical leave. And after that, I would use unpaid leave. My husband also had paid medical leave, or he would take holidays. And again, we would go into unpaid leave. It was particularly stressful when you have a child with frequent hospitalization, which often happens with cystic fibrosis because it's a lung condition mainly. And my husband and I, we always managed to juggle our sick days to ensure that one parent was available. However, on one occasion, Rosie was hospitalized down in Massachusetts where she's in college. My older daughter, who works in New York, she took sick leave to come home and to support us because we had used our sick days. We do not have extended family, so it was a constant worry, and still is, even though she is that bit older. Generally, parents and caregivers of children with chronic health conditions have to attend multiple appointments. When Rosie is healthy, she has clinic every 3 months, and usually she has to get blood draws or other doctor's appointments in between. She also has hospital visits for her rheumatoid arthritis. It's very difficult to manage work, and these clinic visits are always, in our case, during the work week and not on weekends. I must say that Zoom and telehealth has actually helped us in being able to attend appointments and made life that bit easier. So it's very difficult to manage work and ensure your child gets to appointments, which often takes hours due to the complexity of her health condition. On a general note, as the COVID pandemic has taught us, it is imperative to stay at home when feeling unwell so as not to spread infection. And we are so aware of this with cystic fibrosis. We've cocooned for the past year. Rosie got her shot last week, so we're just hoping the rest of the CF community can do that soon. Knowing that people have a cushion of some pay would make it easier to make the right decision. I'm an educator. I worked in the public school system and was very aware of the risks of being in a school environment and passing on illness and infection. So I think as a general rule for society, it would be really, really helpful. Rosie had wanted to testify today, but she is at class. And I know what she wanted to say was, she's a full-time student. She's also doing an internship. She hopes to graduate in June, all going well. But she works in retail. She's worked in the Merrimack outlets. Her employers have been so flexible with her, been very kind to her. And when she wakes up and is unable to work, they give her the day off. She's very fortunate that she lives at home. We can support her. She's hoping to be an independent worker come June when she graduates. I cannot see that happening. I just cannot see that happening in New Hampshire. She hopes to graduate, and I think she will apply for a job that has paid medical leave. It will be imperative that she has access to that. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me and considering this very important bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So the payment of $2,000, $2,000 a year would make that much difference in everyone's lives?
I'm sorry.
So
could you?
So at 72 hours at $30 an hour, that's about $2,100. That's going to be the difference between making it and not making it in most people's lives.
Oh my goodness, there are so many families that are living paycheck to paycheck. Yes, $2,000 would make a huge difference. We have families in the CF community. I am advocacy chair for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, but I am talking on my own personal level here. We have families that I know of. You have grandparents whose children have passed away, and they are trying to juggle. They're trying to juggle work. They're trying to juggle grandchildren who have cystic fibrosis, attend appointments every month, having to take time off work. $2,000 is a huge amount of money, and yes, that would make a difference. I consider myself very privileged in the fact that I'm in a household that my husband has access to health insurance and also has paid medical leave, and we're in a position that we can juggle. But no, there are 200 people with cystic fibrosis in New Hampshire, and there are many families that are juggling and living from paycheck to paycheck. So yes, $2,000 is a huge amount of money.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Gannon.
Hi, Paula. Thanks for telling us about Rosie. Good story. Where are you from? Galway, by any chance?
No, but my husband's family is. I'm from Waterford. Rosie was actually born in Waterford. We moved here in 2001, 2 weeks before 9/11. So it's been a journey. We're citizens now. We made a good choice. America has been very good to us.
Very good. No, I come from Tuam, a little town.
Oh yes, I know Tuam.
Beautiful place. Okay, we'll talk another time about that then.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Lois Cody. Lois, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Chairman French and committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 67. My name is Lois Cody. I'm a resident of Manchester, speaking today on behalf of myself to urge you to support Senate Bill 67. Though now retired, I've had several jobs over my lifetime. Only one full-time job provided no benefits, including no paid sick days, and the pay was poor. It was when I worked as a homemaker for a major visiting nurses service while in graduate school in the early 1990s. As my career path was changing, I had left my prior employer where work hours didn't accommodate classes. I worked 40 hours weekdays, went to school afternoons and evenings, worked a part-time job weekends, and helped my elderly widowed father due to his failing eyesight. By pure grace, I was not often sick. And when I was, I could not work and risk exposing my clients and patients to illness. A few unpaid absences due to colds and a bout with a strep throat hurt financially and led to more borrowing than I had planned. In the end, though I loved working with people, I had to find work that at least provided sick days. I actually found only one. It was in the food service industry that had medical insurance, sick days, and let me flex my schedule according to school needs. Yeah, it was started by 4 visionary young men, and what an irony that they could do so much better with benefits than a long-established medical services organization. It was proof that small businesses can both thrive and provide sick pay when designed for it. This was 25 years ago. I'm going to forgo the rest of my testimony. It's been discussed, but there's no need for people to live with such stress in New Hampshire, in the United States of America in 2021. Every worker needs and deserves sick pay. Please vote yes on Senate Bill 67. And I thank you, Chairman and committee members, for your time.
Thank you. Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Molly Lunn Owen. Molly, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. My name is Molly Lunn Owen. I live in Manchester. I work for an issue advocacy organization, but I'm representing myself. I am testifying today in support of SB 67. I am 30 years old and one of those people, young people, who doesn't get sick until I got sick. I got the flu last year in February, might have been COVID, but pretty sure it was the flu, and was out of work for almost 2 weeks. I was 8 months pregnant at the time. My current organization does offer paid sick time, but my last organization, a very well-known and well-regarded nonprofit in the state, whom I loved working for, had I still been working for them, I would have returned to work with 0 paid maternity leave days had I taken those 2 weeks as paid sick leave when I was sick. That it worked out okay. Last year, I had changed employers and was able to use sick time, but most parents in New Hampshire don't have paid sick leave. And I'm speaking here today as a spouse of a Navy reservist approaching his first deployment. He'll be deploying in April for almost a year. So just about as long as our daughter's been alive, he's going to be gone. And I'm thankful for his service, but I don't know what I would do if I didn't have sick time while he's away, while he's on deployment. Almost a third of families in New Hampshire are single parent families headed by one person who doesn't have a spouse to fall back on. So basically their spouse is on deployment at all times. And being able to take care of themselves is first and foremost to taking care of their families. And passing a bill to mandate paid sick leave in the state is so important for the resilience of workers like me, of our families, and of all New Hampshire's residents. So I urge you to support this bill. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, committee member? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next person I have on my list is Addie Moriarty. Addie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. So my name is Addie Moriarty, and I am a doc up at Dartmouth Hitchcock up at Chad and pediatrics, although I'm representing myself in the New Hampshire Medical Society in support of SB 67. So I wanted to just address a couple things that have come up in the hearing thus far, and the question of whether some of these smaller payments are what it seems like smaller payments or days off would help workers. And actually, the numbers really work out. So 21% of people who have less than $250 in their savings account, they miss housing payments. If we can have people that have more than $250, that drops to 15%. And so people losing their housing is a big deal. And maybe that's missing one day of work, maybe it's missing two. But as a physician here, I see families every single day that are struggling to make it to appointments. They're struggling with long-term care in our NICU, in our PICU, on the ward. Kids get sick with respiratory illnesses when we're not all wearing masks, and they're here for 3 to 5 days, no matter what. And that is a big deal for New Hampshire families. It's a really big deal. It is the Super Bowl of their child's life, is to be admitted to the hospital. And so, and as a parent myself, I know how hard it is to take time off of work or get a call from daycare. I also just really want to emphasize how important this is for everybody, not just parents. We have all experienced illnesses. We've all experienced hardships in our life and those have all been brought to light in COVID. Really, really exposed. Those of us that are lucky enough to have paid leave written into our salaries are just that, the lucky ones. The people in the lowest wage quartiles don't have paid leave. So this is the second bill that I've testified in support of this session. And I really, I hear the small businesses, but actually the numbers are in your favor. When people don't miss work and they don't lose their jobs, you make more money because you don't have to train a new employee. You don't have to recruit for new employees. And this is not asking for a full year off like some countries offer. This is days that we're asking for, to put everybody on an equal playing field and afford time off with a new baby, or not going to work sick and not spreading infectious diseases, which we've seen it become more and more important. So I really urge you all to think closely about your own experiences, the experiences of your family, and vote for this bill.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you.
The next person I have on the list is Ellen Duville. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I have a daughter with a chronic health condition. When she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 2, she spent time in the hospital, and we had multiple medical incidents that required constant attention. We alternated staying with her in the hospital, but for one of us, it was tough to manage with the employer. In addition, a child with a serious medical illness creates an economic stress, putting parents in a vice between caring for their child and their employment. It's more difficult when one does not have paid time off from work to make all necessary appointments for their child. So many families in New Hampshire are in this situation right now. We made it work and our employers did what they could, but it shouldn't come down to having a good employer for parents to ensure their child will get necessary care and they're still able to pay their bills. This would be an insurance program of sorts where we would help each other get through a tough moment in our lives, which of course is the purpose of insurance, to kind of share risk. The pandemic has made this even harder for working families, and I urge you to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Sheila Orange. Sheila, you should be able to unmute yourself.
You're so efficient, Cameron. Thank you.
Isn't he great?
He's fantastic. You're all fantastic. Thank you for your service. This is the second time I am testifying on behalf of one of these bills. The details, the specifics of the bill aren't as important as to just get something in place. I am now 73 years old, operating 2 full-time businesses, starting up another practice. My husband and I are very privileged because we live up in Hebron in a very remote place. And we have a lot of control over where we go and what we do and who we let into our bed and breakfast. That hasn't always been the case. I like to look back on it and say it was a long life, but it's not as long as it's going to be. I have experienced all of that. I have experienced losing a job because the person I was working for in a large institution, I couldn't give him an answer to how long is this going to go on, that I needed to go and take people to medical appointments. There was nothing in place to protect me from losing that job or to get me an equivalent job after the situation was resolved, which didn't last all that long, but he just was not willing to have that disruption to his schedule. I have had the experience of my husband missing a payment on the supplemental health care and me losing my health care for 6 years until I went on to Medicare. I had no health care. Good thing I'm relatively healthy from Hardy survivor stock. I've had the situation of needing to take children to medical appointments because they had chronic conditions. And my husband at the time did not have a driver's license. So I was the one who always had to do it and didn't have that much coverage. All these situations are only to tell you that I'm speaking from personal experience and the experience of my daughter and my granddaughter with their families. It's not that people want a handout. I've had help in my life at the worst times, when I got laid off from my job when I was 7 months pregnant and I had to go on welfare because I needed to have that baby and I couldn't get another job at 7 months pregnant. Since then, both before that, since I was 17 years old, I've been paying taxes into the system, federal and state. Since then, I've been continuously employed, never been out of a job for more than a few weeks because I was willing to do anything honest to help support my family. It's not socialism. It's not a handout. If you can provide a little bit of a safety net to give people that boost. Does $2,000 make a difference? Absolutely, Senator French. That might have prevented me from losing my health insurance for 6 years. This bill may or may not be perfect. I admire the people who crafted it. I admired the people who sponsored it. What's important to have a family-friendly economy in New Hampshire is to get something in there. We can always polish it, tweak it, and perfect it later. Nothing ever survives the plan. No battle ever survives the plan. I'm a military daughter, a former military spouse. And you know that when you put something into practice, it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to have to make adjustments in how it's applied. Don't let that hold you back from doing something to help the young families of New Hampshire to get through whatever they're going through so that they can be like me and my husband, productive and participating for another 30, 40, 50 years as healthy citizens with healthy children. Please support this bill.
Thank you very much. Questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Cameron?
The next person I have is Gail Taylor. Gail, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. My name is Gail Taylor. I'm a resident of Concord. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on this bill. I'm here today to express my support for SB 67, establishing a paid sick leave program. I edited my testimony after hearing the previous testimony, so you're not hearing the same things over and over again. I want to tell you that I'm speaking for myself and my own experiences. I'm a baby boomer, retired from a career in high tech. I was lucky enough, like many of you, to have pretty decent benefits. But then in 2009, as a 55-year-old woman, I got laid off from IBM. I then established a small business after not being able to get rehired in any stretch of the imagination during those times. But this really isn't about me. What I want to do is talk about the differences now with the younger generation. At IBM, I had good benefits, although they were nowhere near as good as they were for the previous generation, nowhere near. I mean, our healthcare was barely paid for. There was a lot of things that were different from the previous generation of IBMers. But what I see now with our younger generation, they have even fewer benefits. I have 3 children, Gen X, millennial, 2 are millennials, one's Gen Z, and I look at their jobs. There's certainly no paid sick leave. That would be so far at the bottom of the list of things that are available. Now, meanwhile, our generation of baby boomers are going to need them, if we haven't already, to help us with our care. And if they can't even get a few hours of paid sick leave when they've got these rents that are sky high, that their cost of living is so much different than it was for us, they won't be able to, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. They won't be able to take care of us. So I think the businesses today, like when I had my small business, that paid sick leave should be considered a cost of doing business. It's time to make this happen. I listened to the testimony of the previous bill when there was a lot of discussion of the cost of doing business. And I think this should be added to that. Thank you for listening. And I want to make sure you know that I support SB 67.
Thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, the next person I have is Jennifer Frizzle. Jennifer, you should be able to unmute yourself. Jennifer, it looks like you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go
Great.
ahead.
Thank you, Chairman French and members of the committee. I am Jennifer Frizzle. I'm here today on behalf of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, where I work as the Director of Policy. The New Hampshire Women's Foundation is the only statewide nonprofit dedicated to elevating equality and opportunity for women and girls here in New Hampshire. And we do that through grant making, research, advocacy, and public policy. And one of the primary issues that we focus on at the Women's Foundation is issues that impact women in the workforce and issues that impact women in their disproportionate role as caregivers. And so with that perspective, I'm here in strong support of Senate Bill 67. The Women's Foundation has been monitoring the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic through the funding that we provide to local nonprofits. And we also commissioned a research report last year in 2020 to look at the disproportionate impacts of COVID on New Hampshire women. I presented that to this committee in advance of Senate Bill 64 earlier, and I sent it into your inboxes this morning as well in anticipation of this testimony. Senate Bill 67 is a very important bill for women and men in the workforce, but my focus today is to urge you to adopt it because of the disproportionate burden that New Hampshire's women, particularly its working mothers and its lower income women, are bearing in our economy, a disproportionate burden they carried before this pandemic, but one that has been greatly exacerbated, and its policies like Senate Bill 67 and other childcare opportunities and investments that are before this legislature that are really going to make the difference as to whether or not women can return to full employment in a way to help our economy recover and to help our families recover. So some specific highlights from our report that really drive our support for this bill. Women in New Hampshire are twice as likely, 68%, to be working in the industries that we consider to be essential work in the pandemic. So that's healthcare, nursing care, childcare, social service care, frontline grocery work, and other economic occupational sectors that the Department of Labor identifies as essential work. Women were disproportionately likely to contract COVID in New Hampshire in 2020 and to die from COVID than their male counterparts. And actually in New Hampshire, the impact of COVID on women is in the top 10 states as far as their male counterparts. So it's really something we've been watching at the Women's Foundation, all of these different ways that the pandemic is disproportionately impacting women. And then the last one is in caregiving. Data shows, including some data from our own Department of Employment Security, that women are leaving the workforce or disrupting their employment 4 times rate greater than their male counterparts because of things like disrupted childcare, remote learning, and other types of forced choices between their health and well-being. The need for paid sick days is more urgent now than ever. You've heard many compelling stories during the testimony that came before me, and so I'm not going to share some of the anecdotes and evidence that we've seen about personal situations that would benefit from this. I'm going to focus on the data, but I am accompanying some written testimony to make up for the areas that I'm abbreviating. And so I did also want to draw your attention to what I mentioned, which is the New Hampshire Economic Conditions Report that comes out every month from our own Department of Employment Security. And they're actually been publishing a week by week on all of the unemployment trends. And the data that came out at the end of January 2021 showed that, in fact, employment for men in New Hampshire has almost completely regained where it was prior to the pandemic. It's at 0.7% greater than it was then. But for women, it's more than 2 points greater than that. And Brian Gottlob, who's our chief economist over at the Department of Employment Security, has said that women are not going to be able to fully uptake their past participation in the New Hampshire economy unless we have measures that will address issues like caregiving. And I strongly urge you to put sick leave and childcare in those categories as you think about priorities, because the best economic stimulus for New Hampshire heading into the next year is to ensure that women can return to the workforce and achieve full employment equivalent to their male counterparts and at the levels that they were prior to the COVID pandemic. I have a couple of things I'd just like to point out in response to the testimony or questions that came from other members of this committee. Early on, when Senator Whitley was introducing the bill, Senator Gannon had a question about, I think based on the idea that younger workers between 20 and 40 are less likely to want or need sick leave. That, if true, is only true for men. In fact, the groups of workers who are most in need of this type of sick leave in order to return to the workforce fully in these emerging out of pandemic conditions are women between the ages of 25 and 34. And then the next group is women between the age of 35 and 45. Those are clearly primary years where women have young children who get sick, where women have issues of their own health care, including maternity care, that draw upon them to have medical appointments that are necessary. And so if in fact there's a perception that that age group of workers is not the direct beneficiary of this, that would not be true for women in those categories. And so I hope to leave you with a narrative that in fact it's working mothers in those categories who are most detrimentally being economically and health-wise affected by this pandemic, and who really need you to invest in them going forward in order to be a full part of this economic recovery. There have been some economic reports out of the Federal Reserve from our region in Boston, some saying that working mothers are at risk of being set back as much as a decade economically in their careers because of the setbacks that have been placed on them and the caregiving responsibilities in this pandemic, and that 70% of women in these age brackets between 25 and 44 are reconsidering their career goals because the economy and the caregiving system is not built here in New Hampshire to address their concerns. So in conclusion, I know the question that some people have asked in opposing this bill is, should the role of government be to tell employers what benefits they should offer? I would urge you to ask a different question, which is, should the role of government be to address chronic and persistent gender disparities in the labor market that negatively affect more than half the population, and that would be New Hampshire women. So I thank you for hearing my testimony. I would welcome the opportunity to follow up any of my data and research to answer your questions, and be supportive of the committee should you be moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. For those, we've got quite a list of people still waiting. We have to be off at noontime. Please keep it to 3 minutes and don't repeat anything you've already heard. Thank you, Cameron. Next.
Okay, the next person I have is Cody Jacobson. Cody, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you all hear me?
We can.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Cody Jacobson, and I am the Director of Campaign Operations for the Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy. We are a New Hampshire-based advocacy program and working to advance policies that help people make ends meet and be there for their families. I'm here to ask you to support Senate Bill 67. This bill would ensure that people who work and rely on their income to pay their bills can continue to make ends meet when they need to be out of work for a few days, for a day, or just because they're sick. According to research from 2018 by the Kersey School of Public Policy, which is at UNH, 32% of working people in New Hampshire don't have access to a single paid sick day. People working without paid sick days have one of two options right now. They can either go to work sick, risk exposing their coworkers, customers, employer, or they can go without pay. Not all working people have access to sick days equally. People working part-time hours and in lower wage jobs are least likely to have access. And I did actually want to correct a former testifier who mentioned that, these were mostly minors, not the main breadwinners of families. That is actually just not true. They're not just high schoolers working for monies to go to movies with their friends. 88% of them are over the age of 20. Almost a third of them have children, and on average, they earn half of their family's income. Speaking from personal experience from my two previous jobs from 2010 to 2016, I did not have access to paid sick days. I was in high school and college, and I used that money to pay for my college tuition, something that I think everybody on this committee can agree is important. This means that people who are responsible for care of others, including mothers of young children and families with a person experiencing disability, are less likely to have access to paid sick days. Only about half of working people working for less than $14 an hour have any paid time off that they can use for a sick day. And people working for the lowest wages and those most likely to be unable to pay for their basic needs when they lose pay from a sick day are least likely to earn paid sick leave. For the typical family without paid sick days, 3 days of lost wages due to illness can equate to over an entire month's grocery budget. That means that these families are going to be more reliant on government programs, and have to seek assistance elsewhere. Working people without access to paid sick days are nearly twice as likely to report to work with contagious illnesses, putting their coworkers and customers at risk. I'd say that this cost to small businesses is much less compared to the impact of having to shut down your restaurant or small business for 2 weeks due to COVID or another contagious illness, which is something we've seen numerous times here in New Hampshire, and just scan the GoFundMes of restaurants that are struggling to stay open because of that. Paid sick day laws that are in effect in many states across the country and every other state in New England are shown to drive down rates of contagious illnesses. The pandemic has made it crystal clear that we are better off when sick people can stay home. Without access to paid sick time, many workers must go to work sick or send their children to school and childcare when they are ill so they can pay their bills. Everyone gets sick and everyone deserves the opportunity to get well. I ask you to support Senate Bill 67, provide a basic floor so that everyone has an opportunity to earn paid sick time, which will have a public health benefit for all of us. Thank you all.
Cody, thank you for your testimony. Does anyone on the committee have any questions? Doesn't seem so. Cody, thank you very much for your testimony. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cameron, who's
Okay. The next person I have is MK Kilcoin, who I don't believe I see. I do not. And then the last person I have signed up to speak on my list is Amy Brady, who I also do not see. However, we do have a couple of hands raised.
okay? Go for the hands.
Let me see here. So it looks like Ted Jankowski has his hand raised. Let's see if we can get him. Ted, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, this time.
Oh, we got you this time, Ted. Go ahead.
That's right.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today in support of this bill. I worked with the Massachusetts Community Action Network to pass a paid sick leave bill in Massachusetts. And I worked, my background is economics. I did a lot of analysis for them. I presented to legislative committees down there, and it was very interesting. After this bill passed, I knew some of the lobbyists for the Restaurant Association. I knew some of the other lobbyists that were convenience stores that were opposed to this bill. About 2 years later, I was at an event where I saw both of these, it happened to be gentlemen, and they said, that bill really wasn't too bad. It really was okay. And they mentioned how one person found out that they were saving in money because they weren't having to retrain people that had already been trained in a job. The other thing I just want to briefly mention is that we started an effort on the Seacoast to thank frontline medical workers for everything they've been through in the last year. And one of the things that I learned in this effort to try to get people to thank frontline medical workers is the number of frontline workers that I wasn't thinking about. The people that work in the grocery stores, the people that work in the convenience store, the lady that works in my dry cleaners. And they would say, gee, we appreciate the effort and we feel like we're frontline workers too. And almost to a T, I would ask so many of these people, by the way, do you get paid sick days off? And so many of them, the vast majority said, no, I do not. We do not, So when you think of frontline workers, if one thing we've learned in this past year of the pandemic is that there are people out there that really need help and assistance. And this is a basic human right. All of our neighboring states have it as well. And I just want to speak in strong support for the passage of this measure.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Cameron?
Okay, the next hand I have is identified in the Zoom only as programs team run for something. If you could unmute yourself and identify yourself.
Hey, this is Representative Manny Espitia. Sorry, I was on my work account, so I apologize for that. But I apologize for not being there earlier. I was, our dog was urgently needed to get walked, so I apologize for that. But this is Representative Manny Espitia. Thank you for having me in your committee, Chair. And I just wanted to speak on the bill, SB 67, because I think it's an urgent need for members in my community. For those who don't know, Hillsborough 31, downtown Nashua. It is, downtown Nashua is one of the great place to go, great place to visit, but the residents of this community are also one of the poorest in the state. The median income, household income the median income of my district is about $33,000. And we are in an area where, I think a lot of us are trying to make it in this world. We're trying to, get jobs that are gonna help our families out. But a lot of us are also dependent on, we're dependent on rent. And so I will say, I think some of us have to make the decision: do we want to go to work? Do we want to go to work, or do we want to miss out on a payment for our rent? And when that happens, are we going to be stuck with the homeless? Are we going to become homeless eventually? And that's another real issue that we're seeing, not just in my community, but also in New Hampshire at large. And so and I'm fortunate. I work at a job that offers me paid sick time, but I also know that there are many in my community who don't have that option. And while I think it's, the other personal aspect of this is the intersection between that we are seeing now, which is, the physical and the mental aspect of paid sick time, where, I think, mental health is being taken care is actually being taken more seriously now. And we're seeing, I think before there was a stigma of folks not wanting to be able to take sick time because of there was no, physical ailment, but there was a much more of a mental element. So I think, when we're thinking of this paid sick time, we're also addressing a lot of the mental health issues that we're looking at in our state. And I'll just close by saying that while, I think the point was brought up earlier about $2,000, and, I think, and how detrimental that loss could be. So many people, in my community live paycheck to paycheck, and where it is hard, where, $2,000 is maybe 2 months worth of rent. I think it's just so important where people need to make that decision of whether they want to put food on the table or whether they want to be able to, whether they want to take the time and risk their health. So as we think about, the future of our state, I think, paid sick time is so important for many of these young families. So I appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate y'all allowing me to come to your committee.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative. We have quite a few more speakers that propped up. Please keep it to the subject, as well as don't repeat anything you've heard. To agree. Thank you.
Okay, the next hand I have is Martin Toe. Martin, you should be able to unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Martin Toe. I'm from Hooksett, and I am testifying on behalf of myself and my community. I'm testifying in support of SB 67. I want to start out by saying this. Family sick leave is critical. As you already know, in New Hampshire here, we're dealing with like a horrifying drug epidemic, and that's crippling family. I want to say this, just make this as a point, but what's the point of, lawmakers if you can't, protect the citizens under your jurisdiction? I know a young lady, who was under distress. She had 2 kids, and she killed herself because no one was able to take a day off from their work to be there with her. Another story, I know a young man that I grew up with hung himself because his mother, his sisters weren't there, community members weren't there to take a day off to attend to his emotional distress and loneliness. Recently, another young man that I knew again and grew up with, an All-American athlete, shot himself because of hopelessness and something as untangible but can be provided by simply being there. I think today, your votes really shows your value for human life. I can go on and count, 10 people who have lost loved ones to suicide recently, and I'm not talking 5 years, I'm talking recently. Just because their families weren't able to be there, and that was simply because they weren't able to take off time to really attend to those things. I hear a lot of people saying, this anti-small business topic, but it's obviously healthier people produce more and they provide better services. Whenever I go out to eat, when the waiter or waitress is dealing with something, they provide crappy service, and ultimately, your exchange of service also matters when, to the customers that's paying. So if people aren't in a healthy space, you can't expect them to also want to spend money. So please, I'm just asking you to get something in place that protect your constituents and residents in New Hampshire. Thank you. Blessings.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. Camera?
The next hand I have is Asma El-Houni. Asma, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Asma El-Houni. I am the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy New Hampshire, and we are here in strong support of SB 67. I know a lot of things were said, so I'll try to keep it short and just basically say it's really important that we're talking about those who we are now calling vital workers, even though they've always been vital workers. The majority of these vital workers do not have paid sick leave. We need their labor, but yet we don't want to protect them so that they can continue doing the amazing work that they're doing. So what's happening is our vital workers are going to work despite the fact that they are feeling symptoms of sicknesses that are very contagious. So they're going in order to continue to be able to provide for their families. And so what we are getting is people forced to go to work where they're affecting other people. This isn't just about those who have to be forced to go to work when they're sick. It's going to affect all of us in our communities, even those who do have paid sick leave, because we come in contact with these people. So paid sick leave is good for all of us, not just those people over there, right? It's also in the best interest of small businesses to implement paid sick leave so that their employees are not going to work while sick and possibly making other people sick on the job, which means more employees could get sick and possibly not do the best work that they can do, or take off, right? And so making less of a workforce for that day or that month, etc. So it's in the best interest of employees, not to mention others in the community as well, to ensure that there is paid sick leave. Essentially, this argument of small businesses is really not true in the long run. They actually benefit by having paid sick leave. I also want to invite all of you who have this decision-making power for our state, for our community members, to just really put yourselves in the shoes of those people that are surviving paycheck to paycheck, which is essentially the majority of people who do not have paid sick leave. When you have to, decide whether to go to work when you're sick, because you can't afford to lose money that goes towards groceries, that goes towards transportation, that goes towards healthcare expenses. So I urge the committee to please vote in support of SB 67 today.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Cameron?
The next hand I have is Nathaniel Nichols. Nathaniel, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
All right, thank you for having me here today. So I'm Nathaniel. I'm originally from Concord, New Hampshire, but I'm now a junior at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm here in support of Senate Bill 67 because I believe it's a step in the right direction for New Hampshire. Currently, it's some people aren't able to take paid sick days off, which is bad because, as we have all learned from this pandemic, if someone's sick, especially with a contagious disease, they should stay home. And so I think that this bill is doing the right thing because it will allow workers who are sick to stay home when they need to, which will, in the long run, be better for the economy. That's all I have to say. I know you guys, your time is running out, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Cameron?
Okay, the last hand I have raised is MK Kilcoyne. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello. Okay. Hello, my name is MK Kilcoyne. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm here to speak in support of SB 67. And thank you for allowing me to speak today. For almost 10 years, I worked in the service industry as a pastry chef. Baking is a passion of mine, but to be honest, it didn't do much to pay the bills. On top of low wages, your benefit package at best is getting a free meal after an 8-hour shift with no breaks. Due to this, I would work no matter how sick I was, which, being a cancer survivor with a compromised immune system, meant that was a lot. I've gone into work being so congested I could barely stand. I've gone in after throwing up half an hour before I had to be at work, which I was ordered to come into work, even though I told them I was like that. And twice I've gone into 2 different jobs with strep throat because I couldn't afford to go see the doctor until my day off. And if one person in the kitchen is sick, you knew you would all get sick because none of you could take the time off to actually get better. The thought of getting any type of real healthcare from a culinary position is incredibly unrealistic. You have to work there for at least a year or 6 months at full time to even get health insurance that does not cover what is necessary. After being diagnosed with cancer, I decided I couldn't treat my body like that anymore. Even that meant I'd struggle to pay rent. So I ended up losing quite a few jobs due to being unreliable because of how sick I kept getting. And this was with me informing them at the beginning of my employment that I was a cancer survivor with a compromised immune system. I absolutely believe if I had had paid sick leave during that time, I could have taken the time to actually get better and lead a much healthier lifestyle. Paid sick leave will at least be able to help people stay home and get well rather than exhaust their bodies and possibly spread whatever they have to staff and customers. This is important all the time, but especially during a pandemic. That is why I'm asking the committee to vote in favor of SB 67.
Thank you. And one question, how did you get on our video?
I don't know, it just popped on, so.
There are some versions of Zoom where if it's not the most up-to-date version, the panelist and attendee system doesn't work correctly.
Nice, nice. Congratulations. Good to see you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one last hand raised. It is Representative Maria Perez wanting to speak for a second time.
Yep, making sure.
Okay. Oh, she disappeared.
Well, that was really short.
Representative Perez, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you again, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak for the second time. One of the things that I've been listening to all the testimonies, and so far no one haven't speak and say anything about a lot of companies right now. They hiring temporary employees who they're not getting any benefits. These temporary employees, some of them, they get hired for 6 months to a year contract. And these employees, they're not getting sick time, they're not getting vacation time, they don't get holiday, they're not getting any benefits. So to be honest, when I heard some of the people saying that all the companies, you know, they providing whatever they can to employees, that's not true, because temporary employees did not get protected by anything. An example is that is, to be honest, my husband, he's an electrician, and he's been laid off a couple of times during the pandemic, even though he's been so busy. But a lot of companies, they hire just temporary employees. He had a car accident 3 weeks ago. Our vehicle was total loss. The airbag deployed. I'm so lucky that he's still alive, but because he's a temporary employee with the company, even though he got hit really bad by the airbag and the seat belt, he was forced to go to work the next day after the car accident, even though he was in a lot of pain, but he doesn't get covered of any of these benefits. So to be honest, I'm not speaking just for my husband, but I'm speaking for a lot of people that these companies they hiring is the temporary employees because of the situation right now, and they're not getting any benefit. They're not temporary employees don't get any sick time pay or any benefits at all.
Thank you, Representative.
Okay, Senator French, we have one more hand that was raised while Representative Perez was talking. It is Ian Staubs.
Under the buzzer, bring him in.
Yeah, hi. I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to state that it's my opinion that your vote on this matter determines whether or not you actually care about people who are in need. It's a very basic, simple thing where you can go one way or the other. Try to separate the politics from it. Please care about the people of your state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator French, there are no hands at this time.
Then I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 67. Was going to exec today, but Senator Susie couldn't remain with us. She had previous obligations. So if I can get a motion to adjourn. Motion by Senator Cavanaugh, seconded by Senator Gannon. We'll take a roll. Senator Bradley.
Senator Bradley, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes.
Senator Cavanaugh.
Yes.
Senator Gannon.
Yes.
Senator French says yes. So we'll be in adjournment and we'll meet again next week. Finish up.